This is the ACA 1094C, 1095C webinar. I am Jane Brionic, and I am with Thinkware. And for the next half hour or so, we are going to be talking about the 1094C and the 1095C that's in Darwin 1060. A couple housekeeping things. Currently, I have everybody listed on mute just to keep the background noise to a minimum. The second thing is we've scheduled a half hour for this. The webinars thus far have run a little bit over that, and that is going at a very quick pace. So for questions, if you have any questions at all during the webinar, after the webinar, if you upgrade to 1060 and are working with the ACA and still have questions about it, please email productmanagement@thinkwareinc.com. Those emails will come to me, and I will make sure we get answers for you to your questions, and we get those back to you as soon as we possibly can. The 1094C and 1095C is now available in Darwin 10.60. The 1094 and 1095C are the only two forms that we have in Darwin available for the ACA year-end reporting. One item to note is on the 1095, Part 3, which is dealing with self-insured, will not populate from what we have set up for functionality in Darwin. So that will not be something on your 1095 that will populate with data for self-insured. There is a lot of data that we have to incorporate in these forms, a lot of different scenarios that we had to keep in mind. We tried to cover as much of it as we can with our functionality and setup. I will be moving back and forth between some setup. So I apologize for that, but in order to get it all covered, I'm going to be moving around quite a bit. So in order to get started with this, the first thing I want to mention is with the 1094 and 1095, there are basically three ways in Darwin, or three methods, that you can get your data into the employee 1095 window, which I will show you. That window then will populate on your 1095, and there's also some fields on the client side for the 1094 that will populate on the 1094 when you produce those. The three methods basically that you can use to incorporate that data into the 1095 window and thus the form are we've created a utility that you can use, or we've created for ALE members. The payroll process will produce certain codes on their 1095 window, or you can always go in and manually enter or edit any of the codes on the 1095 for the employee or the 1094 for the client piece or the employer piece. So you can do that at the 1095. You can do ahead of time if you'd like to make those edits, or you can do it before you produce the forms, because the process is very similar to the W-2 process in Darwin. So those are the three different methods, and we'll talk a little bit about those in just a few minutes. The first thing I'm going to do is go through the setup piece as far as the 1094s and 1095s in Darwin. So at the company level, and one thing I want to mention here before we go any further, if you are currently using any of the ACA functionality in Darwin for the look-back report or affordability, a lot of these windows are going to be very familiar because we've expanded on them for these new features and functions. If you are not familiar with those windows, the only thing we're touching on today on those windows are the new features and buttons and so forth for the 1094 and 1095. So if you go out to the company setup at Tools, Setup, Company, on the ACA window, it's very similar to the window that we had previously for ACA look-back reporting. We've added a couple buttons. But before we get into those, I want to talk about this part-time, full-time hours per month. If you have this already set up, one thing to keep in mind is that the number there is the number that you're going to be using for the 1094 and 1095 to produce whether code should be part-time for the employee or if they should have the full-time. If you do not have that set up because you're not using the current functionality, you will need to put the hours per month that you want as a threshold in that field. The two buttons that we have added are the 1094 ALE group setup and the 1095 pay code selection. The 1094 ALE group setup is for any clients that you may have that are part of an aggregate group. On the 1094C, you can have it identified that you have employers that are part of an aggregate group or an aggregated group. This is going to allow you, the setup here, to put those clients in a group and have them identified as that aggregated group. So all you need to really do here is to go ahead and type in a name. Oops, I'm going to delete that one just to show you. Type in a name. It will ask if you want to create it. Put in a description, and then save that. What you can then do is go out to your client list, and you can select whichever clients that you want to be part of that aggregated group. Once you have all the clients out there, there is a column here called the 1094 filer. Basically what this is going to do, on your 1094C, you have where you need to mark if the 1094C is an authoritative transmittal for the ALE member. If the client out here has that check mark, they are going to be the authoritative transmittal for that aggregated group. So they will be the filer, so to speak. So you can mark only one out there, but you need to at least have one marked as the filer for the 1094C. And then you can, of course, save and close out, and you've got your aggregated group set up. Now, the one thing to keep in mind, and we'll show you this on the client card as well, is those clients that are in their aggregated group have to have the ALE checkbox also marked for them. And I'll show you that when we get to the client setup here in just a few minutes. The 1095 pay code selection is, we have a pay code selection also on the reporting feature for the look back, but we wanted to create a separate field and table for this to pull for the 1094 and 1095. We've set it up at the company level. Basically what this is doing is selecting those pay codes that the system will be using for the hours for that employee for the month. So if there are certain pay codes that you don't want, you would not select them. One thing to keep in mind is if you add a pay code to Darwin at the company level, you will need to come out here and move it from the available field over to the selected field. And you'll have to do that manually. It does not auto-populate once a new pay code has been added. We do at the client level, and we'll see this in a couple minutes, we do have at the client level the ability to also set this up there. That allows you, if you have particular clients that have certain codes that you don't want set up at the company level for all clients, you can set those specific codes up there for that client, for just them to look at those hours for those pay codes. If you set it up at the client level, the system will look there first and take those. If there is nothing set up there, then the system will come and look at the company level to determine what pay codes are going to be used for the hours for the employee. And that really is all you have to do as far as the company setup for the 1094 and 1095. Now, before I get into the actual client piece, just so that makes a little bit more sense, we're going to come out and we're going to look at the employee piece. The employee piece is on the employee card on the ACA setup, you will now see a new button called Employee 1095C. This is going to open up the window that is going to populate for this employee's 1095. And we'll talk a little bit about this after we go through the client setup. But this will bring in, as you know, on the Employee 1095C, basically it's your employee and client information, and then it's going to be line 14, 15, and 16 for the employee. And those are the fields that need to populate. And so all of these fields are showing in this window. So you have access to see what will populate. You can edit it, you can change it, all of that. But I wanted to show you this window before we get into the whole client setup, because some of these are set up at the client level. So if we go back out and go to the client, and again go to ACA setup, all of our extended windows, added fields are on ACA setup windows that are already out in Darwin. So if you click on the ACA setup at the client level, you will notice at the bottom we have a new checkbox here and then a new button as well. The checkbox is the ALE checkbox. That has to be checked in order for this client to get a 1094 and 1095s for their employees. It has to be checked. If it is not checked, they will not produce a 1095C or a 1094. So if you have clients that are not ALE member or ALE clients, they're not going to get a 1094C or 1095. Again, with the aggregated group, even if they're a member of an aggregated group and not the filer, they still need to have the ALE checkbox marked. Okay? Once you check that checkbox, it will open up this 1094, 1095 setup. And if you click on the 1094, 1095 setup, you will see that we have some clients set up both for the 1094C and 1095. For the 1094C, basically the only thing we have out here is your certification and eligibility. This is a field on the 1094C. So if you want this completed for the for your client, you will need to mark whatever applies to them as far as their certification of eligibility. For the 1095 piece, or the employee piece, we have line 14 and 15 out here. Line 14 and 15 are pretty much going to be standard. You may have those one-offs for employees, and if you do, you'll have to manually go out and adjust those on the Employee 1095 window. Line 16 is the code that's going to be interchangeable month per month, depending on what the employee does with hours, with coverage, whether they're new or terminated. So those are not listed here at the client level. Those are going to be covered with our processes of either the utility or the pay run. So for line 14, you would come out here and select the appropriate code that needs to go in that field for this client. Now, this is a client default, so all employees are going to get this. If you have employees that are going to be different and that need a different code out there, you would need to go out and change those on the Employee 1095 window. Keep in mind that with line 14 codes, code 1B, 1C, 1D, and 1E all require, according to the IRS guidelines, that you also populate the dollar amount in line 15 of the employee-only premium coverage. So with that, you also have this ability to set up your line 15 information. Now, if you set up line 15 information and your code is 1A, that really is not going to make a difference. The only difference is it's not going to bring line 15 information into the form. If you have 1B, 1C, 1D, or 1E, whatever is out here will be brought into the form for that employee of that client. So on line 15, you can basically do one of two ways. You can have the age banded, or you can have, per se, a category rated type plan that you can set up those amounts. This one in particular that I have set up here is a category rated plan that it's $200 for the employee only premium for that particular employee or client. So I set up the 1/1 to 12/31 of 2015 at $200. As you can see, you can also set up future. So if you know what your next renewal plan amount is going to be, you can have that set up out there as well. It will pull according to the start and the end date. Now, if you have an age-banded plan, you will need to make sure on this original ACA setup window that you have the age-banded plan set up checked. Once you have it checked and you come into the 1094, 1095 setup, the age band calculation will open up as well as the actual start and end age. You will need to go out and enter in your tiers for your different age levels and the amounts. The age band calculation piece is basically going to tell the system, if I have an employee with a birth date and they are going to move to the next tier up and thus have a different amount, this will tell us where to put that as far as the month on their 1095. So for the age banded calculation method, the first of the months checked means if my birthday is today, in October, I am going to have a new amount if I've moved to a new tier in the age band level. If it is first of next month, what is going to occur is if I have a birthday today, November will show the new amount for the new tier that I've moved to. If I have renewal date, it will look to the start date for that renewal and put that amount in that month. So that's what's going to occur with the age banded method as far as the line 15. Then we also, as I mentioned, at the company setup level, we have the 1094 pay code selection. Here is where you would go out, and for this particular client, if I want to bring in certain pay codes, I can, but those are going to be the only pay codes that bring in hours for the month for those employees. If I don't have anything set up here, like I do for this client, it is going to look to the company level. And so it will follow what is set up at the company level. Now, if I add new pay codes, I have to add them at the company level, but I have to also come out here and add them at the client level if I have specific client level pay codes set up. It does not roll down from the company level. The last thing we need to talk about before we get into the whole employee piece and the process and some of the methods is there is one other feature that's kind of a company setup, kind of a client setup, and that is with the 1095s, we have to also mark employee coverage and by month. So in order to do that, our processes will pick that up, but we have to have some sort of identifier for the system to pick up that they have coverage. So what we have done is we have gone out to the benefit setup, and on the benefit setup you will notice we have a new field here called ACA benefit. This is only on the benefit setup, so you will need to set it up here and assign it to employees. Now, you can set it up to a current benefit that you have, a plan benefit, but you're going to have to go back and reassign those to the employees to get them out there. One of the things we discovered with testing, and we had talked about with testing, is creating a separate benefit called ACA coverage. You're going to set it up. It does not need to be a dollar amount, so you don't have to bill the client for any of it, but it is a benefit that will identify that this employee has coverage. Now, it could be considered double duty if you want to, if you've already got a plan one out there, but that's your call as far as what your business practices are as far as how you handle benefits. It is just on the benefit side for the simple fact that we considered a majority of the clients are going to have benefits out there, so we put it on the benefit side and marked it there, especially if you're going to create a separate code. You don't want that showing up on a deduction because that may confuse employees. So the benefit has to be assigned to the employee in order for the system to consider that employee as having coverage. One thing it will do, and we'll talk about this in just a minute or two when we get out to the process and the employee 1095 window, is it will take into effect eligibility if you have a waiting period for eligibility. And so we will talk about that as well. But I wanted to point out that this is a new field on the benefit setup that you will need to have taken care of if you want to show coverage per month and have the processes pick that up. So if we go out now to an employee and go out to their 1095 window, what did I not? I didn't go out. One of the things I had mentioned is that line 14 and line 15 will print from your client setup, and that is the case. Now, like I said, if you need to adjust any of those employees from the default that comes through, you can certainly go out and change them to whatever you need to. For line 16, this is going to be the piece or the code that comes through basically for what is being processed. We've automated codes 2A, 2B, 2C, and 2D. Codes 2E through 2I are more specific for your client as far as some of the codes that you can select from are like the safe harbor codes or the multi-employer. So knowing that your clients are going to be different, we really couldn't put that in an automated type process. 2A, B, C, and D we could, so we put those in this automated process of either the utility or the payroll. The codes in and of themselves will calculate based on what is being processed with either your utility or the payroll. So for example, this employee you will see has 2A January through July. If you notice, his start date is 8/1. Code 2A, according to the guidelines, is the employee is not employed that month. This employee was not employed until August, so he's getting a 2A in every month up until August. If an employee terms, you will also see 2A. Now, if an employee terms, the IRS guidelines state you cannot use 2A for the code for the month in which they actually term. It has to be the month following. So if an employee terms today, they would not show 2A in October, they would show 2A in November. So 2A is for either employees that you are new hires or just hired. They will have those for the months they're not employed, or if they're terminated, they will have 2A for the months following termination through the rest of the year or whenever they're rehired. You will see here in August that my employee did start and they got 2D. 2D is the code for the non-assessment periods. Non-assessment periods consist of those look-back periods that you may have, and we don't really have a way to track that individually for clients with the process and what we have set up now. So if you need to mark an employee for an individual non-assessment period because of a look-back, you're going to have to go in and put that code on the employee 1095 window. Benefit eligibility periods are also considered non-assessment. We do track those and are able to capture those with the automation. So how we do that is on the employee, we went out and set up the benefit that was marked as the ACA coverage, which is the ACA covered benefit. And we assign that to the employee as soon as we entered them into the system. Okay? So once they have that, they're going to, the system is going to view them as having coverage. But because we have entered in an eligibility date here, which is a later date, the system will look at those months in between from when the employee had it assigned and the eligibility date to give them code D. So this employee was not eligible for 90 days, so his benefit does not actually, or his coverage does not actually start till 11/1. So he gets 2D until we get to 11 or March, or excuse me, November. As you can see, in November he got 2C. He is now covered and will be covered until he either terminates or the benefit is inactive, or he goes to a new benefit that you have assigned to him with a new selection. So the eligibility piece on the actual employee does come into effect for that code 2D. 2B, which this employee does not have, is the code for part-time. So if an employee is under the 130 hours per month, they're going to get a 2B. If they are covered, they will get 2C. Any employee that has coverage will get a 2C, and that will supersede any other code. So if an employee is part-time and has 2B, and then all of a sudden they have coverage offered, even if they're part-time, and they have 2B, they're going to show up as 2C, because the IRS guidelines do say that 2C takes precedence. So those are your codes for 2A, 2B, 2C, and 2D. And those are codes that will be accommodated by the actual process that we talked about, the methods of how to get the data out there. So moving into those three methods, the pay run now, if you have a client marked as ALE, when you run a pay run, that will automatically update the employee's 1095 card or window. So they will be updated, and that the system will take into effect and look at the pay codes, look at if a benefit's offered, look at term dates, look at start dates, look at eligibility dates. It will do all of that within the actual pay run. So that is one way that you can get the data out there. The second option that you have to get the data out there is through a utility. And if you go to Tools, Utility, Payroll, and down to ACA History Update, you will see out here the ability to select a client, and then you can also select a date range. When we first created this, we created this for the fact of we wanted to have something out there so you could pull the information from January to get up to date with it for this year. As we talked about it and started testing it and playing with it a little bit more, you know, it is a utility that I think can be used on a continuous basis. You could run this if you want per quarter, every 6 months, per year, every month. The choice is really yours. One option would be possibly if you want to run it for the first quarter, look at your data, make any of your edits, then you could put in the dates for the second quarter, run it for that, look at your employees, make any edits, and so forth. Or you can run it in November for the full year, look at your employees, make sure that you agree with what's coming out there for coding, and then maybe do the pay run for December and have that update through the pay run. It really depends on how you want to set up the business practice of using that and what works best with your processes for benefits and payroll. One thing to keep in mind with this is it will not cross years. So you cannot run it from October of 2015 to March of 2016. It has to be within the same year. We do have this feature down here called Override Existing Records. If you have this marked and there are no records out there yet for this client and these employees, you're fine. It will just bring in the records. It's not going to overwrite anything because there's nothing per se over there to overwrite. But if you do have something out there and you've made an edit to an employee on their 1095 window, and you've made it for a date within the date range you're running this for, if that is checked, it will overwrite that and bring in what comes through on the process as far as the line 16 setup. So I just want to make you aware of that. You simply click Run, and it will run according to the parameters and everything that you have set up for the particular client you're running it for. So, for example, if you go out, and I'll try to find, I think there was one. Oh, there he is. This terminated employee, just to show you also the terminated piece with the coding. He was terminated on 9/5, which was the month of September. If you go out and look at his ACA setup, you will see that he did not get the 2A until October, which was the month following his termination. So that is a utility that can be used. And like I said, the more we got to play with it, the more we thought it could be something on a continuous basis and not just a one-time deal to bring in history for this year. So that's something I think clients, you all need to look at and determine how you want to use that and what's the best way to fit your needs. So all of the information's out on the employee card. You're at year end. Everything's ready to go. I am not going to run a wage file because I am pushing time right now, and it takes forever with all my test data out here. The wage file has to be run once you are ready to run your 1095s and your 1094. Very, very similar to the W-2 process. In fact, it's in the same location as your W-2 process. So you run your year-end wage file. You go out to the Edit W-2s, and there is a new button that's called 1095. You can click on that. You can bring up any employee, and you can edit their 1095 window. Now, keep in mind, if you make an edit then, it will not come back and update their 1095 window out here. And one thing, I may not have pointed this out earlier, that we may need to look at is on the actual ACA window, it does keep the year out there. So it does keep history. So if I went out for this employee and actually made an edit after I ran the year-end wage file, it will not come back here and update. So you need to keep that in mind. Once you have your edits done, just like W-2s, you go to Print W-2s, and there is a button for 1094C, and there is a button for 1095. And you click on those, and everything is as similar as it is to W-2. I do want to show you a couple things with the forms. I printed these off last night, but one thing you will notice on the 1095 form, if an employee has all the same codes for all the same months, it's only going to print in the all months column. Part 3, of course, is the one we do not, for self-insured, populate. So this is pretty much what your employees are going to see, unless, of course, they have a different code at some point. So if I go out to an employee that has a different code, you're going to see that each month will populate. Also notice on here the plan start month. Currently, we do not have this populating. This is optional for the year 2015. So we are not populating that at this time. We will probably have an update before year end for some of these form things that I'll mention here when we look at the 1094 and 1095, that we may add that. But right now it does not populate, but it is optional for year 2015. On the 1094, this is going to show you your employee information. Then it's going to show you your transmittal, what you're sending for 1095s. As you can see, it does bring up your ALE aggregated group. So if you have one of those, that would answer yes here. If this client was the authoritative transmittal for it, it would have that checked. Your certificate of eligibility is down here, and that will bring up whatever you have set up at the client card. For Part 3, we have the minimum essential coverage, your employee counts, the aggregated, and the transition relief. For the minimum essential coverage offered, what that is going to do is it's going to look at your full-time employees that have coverage, and if you are at 95% or better that have coverage, you will have that marked yes for the month. For the full-time employee count and the total employee count, the IRS had come out with and said you could either use the first of the month or the last of the month, but it had to be consistent. They have since added to that, since there are other tax reporting dates that are the 12th of the month, you could also use the 12th of the month. We are using the 12th of the month. So keep that in mind when you're running this, that the employee count is occurring at the 12th of the month. The aggregated group indicator is just that. If this client was a member of an aggregated group for that month, it would be checked. And your transition relief indicator out here is going to be, if you have either of the transition relief certifications, it will put an A or B in there accordingly to whatever you have marked of those two. Part 4 then is continued of the aggregated piece. It will list, if this is an aggregated client, it will list the other clients in that aggregated group and their EIN number. When I talked about possibly doing that plan year up with the update that's coming out, a couple things that we are going to be having an update for. Currently, we don't have the name of the person to contact and the contact telephone number coming through. We are going to update that before year end, so that will populate on your 1094. Also, another thing to keep in mind is the 1095s currently only print the first page, which is the main page for the employees. It does not print the continuation page or the instruction page. We are going to update that, so you will have that ability if you would like to print those as well for the 1095. So those are some adjustments that we'll be making, and those will be out before year end. The other thing is the electronic transmittal. We will be creating an electronic file, and that will be in the year end release. So you will have that available as well. As I said, we've ran a little bit over, but there is a lot out there. There's a lot of things to pull in to make these forms work and be accurate. So by all means, please, if you have any questions at all, and like I said, if you upgrade next week and you're playing with it and you have questions, you can still email then. If you have questions today from here, please email them to productmanagement@thinkwareinc.com. I appreciate your time. I know it is valuable. I apologize for going a little bit over, but I wanted to make sure we got everything covered. Thank you again for your time, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their Thursday. Thank you very much.